Thank you for watching CCG's 7th edition of China Global Think Tank Forum. We're now heading to the first panel, China-US Relations in Post-Pandemic Times, Competition and Cooperation. This panel is going to be moderated by CCG President Dr. Wang Huiyao. Over to you.
To the next forum, the discussion. And now we have all the participants on our forum now, and hopefully we're going to have a very fruitful and constructive discussion, and we look forward to this great event. So basically, our first panel of the day is panel 1, China-US relations in post-pandemic times, and competition and cooperation. That is the term we often hear these days. And so really welcome all of you again to this 7th China Global Think Tank Innovation Forum. So my name is Henry Huiyao Wang. I'm the president and the founder of the Center for China and Globalization, and we'll be very honored to moderate this first panel of our opening panel of this forum. So this panel actually is designed to foster a conversation between leading think tank experts in China and US on prospect from for the development for these few years of China and the US in various front. We know that President Xi and President Biden had a very actually quite successful, I would say, summit in Bali just last month. And the good news is that China is also opened up now gradually after COVID plagued China for the last 3 years. We see there's no more quarantine in the domestic situation. Now we hope that we will see the traffic coming pick up pretty soon, international traffic, and we want to see all of you in China. So I think China has concluded 20th Party Congress not too long ago, and we will be really happy to touch upon those as well. And of course, we had recently there are so many new developments. We're going to have a Secretary Blinken to visit China soon. So for this panel, the question I would like to say is to propose is that is Bali summit of G20 a turning point, or maybe a stabilizing factor for the bilateral relation between China and the US? And also, what can we expect of Anthony Blinken's visit in maybe a beginning of next year? The transition to a new dynamics based on dialogues and engagement possible in 2023, and building a floor, of course, and how we can maintain the future recommendations for our bilateral relations. I would like to also introduce our guest, our distinguished panelists today. Is actually, I will just introduce them randomly. And first we had Danny Russell. He's the Vice President for International Security and Diplomacy at Asia Society Policy Institute. And we have Dr. Xu Bu, President, China Institute for International Affairs, International Studies. CII is a very famous think tank in China. He's joining us. We have actually Colin Blackford. I mean, a great multilateralist. I mean, also he's the founder of China-West Dialogue, but also he's the non-resident senior fellow at Brookings. So very pleased to see Colin. And also we have Xue Lan, and a very distinguished expert in China. He's the dean of Schwarzman College, Tsinghua University, and also a very knowledgeable expert on think tank and Sino-US relations. And also we have Ian Johnston. He's the Schwarzman Senior Fellow for China Studies at the Council of Foreign Relations. We just met in the US in July, and thank you for coming. And last but not least, we have Dr. Yu Yunquan. He's the president of Academy of Contemporary China end of the world, ACCW, which is also a very important think tank in China. So this is really very interesting. We have a representative from the think tanks, from the top think tanks in the US, and we have a representative of a top think tank from China. So I'm very pleased to really kick off our conference today with this very top-ranking think tanks leaders. First, probably I just to, because the Danny, you are so far away in the US right now. I would like to start with you first. I mean, Danny Russell, as I said, he's the vice president for international security and diplomacy at the Asia Society Policy Institute. But we know Danny has a very long diplomatic career. He served as a diplomatic at a residence and also with the State Department, and he served as Assistant Secretary for State of East Asia and Pacific Affairs. And of course, he was also served as a White House and a Special Assistant to the President and the National Security Council, and the Senior Director of Asian Affairs, and many important positions. Of course, during your tenure at government, you helped formulate President Obama's strategy, such as rebalance Asia and Asia Pacific region, efforts to strengthen the alliance, but of course, also with multilateral organizations and extend cooperation with the emerging powers in the region. So, Danny, why don't I start with you? We'll have about maybe 5-6 minutes of opening, and then we can have another round of further discussion. So what do you take on the current relation between China and US? Are we seeing a turning point, or how can we really making some proposals for the, let's have a track two for the upcoming top diplomats meetings at the beginning of the year. So Danny, the floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Henry. This is a terrific panel, and I'm really pleased to see some good friends and respected colleagues from both sides of the Pacific here today. So as a starting point, I have to say my view is that US-China relations have deteriorated at a speed and to a level that frankly was unimaginable just say 5 or 6 years ago. The two countries are locked in a security dilemma. Namely, we both blame the other side for the problems that we see. We both insist that the things that we ourselves are doing are fully justified. I think both sides seem convinced that the other one is on the wrong track. It's the other side that needs to change course. And that the relationship has reached a very dangerous stage of rivalry, of mistrust, of misunderstanding. Now, to your question, whether the Bali summit between our two presidents is going to prove just to be a speed bump, or whether it can really serve as an exit ramp away from strategic rivalry towards a sustainable relationship. These are open questions. We really don't know the answer yet. Now, some US officials, actually friends of mine who are in my former jobs that you mentioned, Assistant Secretary of State and Senior Director at the National Security Council, they just finished meetings in Hebei province with Vice Foreign Minister Xie Feng, who I used to work with. They were following up on the Bali summit. They were laying the groundwork for the visit of Secretary Blinken that you referred to in early February, I think, to meet with State Councilor Wang Yi and with other senior officials. Now, the visit of these two US officials was the first since Wendy Sherman went to Tianjin in July of 2021 to meet with Xie Feng. That's a long time. And those 18 months between meetings, I think they're a sad reflection on the lack of engagement between the two governments. But in any case, the agenda for this meeting between US and Chinese officials fell into four basic categories. First was guiding principles for the relationship. Second was the difficult bilateral issues between us. Third was promoting exchanges, promoting communication. And the fourth was areas for cooperation. So in my view, there are two really urgent and essential principles that the two sides need to accept. The first is, don't set unreasonable preconditions for communication or for cooperation. What do I mean by that? Well, let's remember that on August 5th, the Chinese government stopped all dialogue with the US on major issues to protest Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. And then the next month, September, State Councilor Wang Yi told my old boss, John Kerry, that China wouldn't cooperate on global issues like climate change until the US first stopped challenging Beijing's core interests. So I think that kind of linkage is something that we should try to avoid. You know, our responsibilities as major powers, responsibilities to humanity, responsibilities to planet Earth, really mean that our two nations don't have an alternative to cooperate, that we have to cooperate on global challenges like climate change, like food security, like infectious disease or nuclear proliferation. So my proposal is that a first principle in US-China relations should be to declare these areas as safe spaces for cooperation, no matter what the state of our bilateral relationship might be at any particular moment. And I'd say that the second key principle is that we urgently need to manage military risks. You know, that means developing procedures that reduce the chances of an accident or of some sort of incident between our militaries. And it also means putting in place dialogues and mechanisms that could help prevent an incident, if it does happen, from escalating into a crisis. So those would be my two recommendations based on where I think things stand and the upcoming visit by Secretary Blinken. But I'm very, very interested in listening to what others on the panel might have to offer. So let me stop here and turn it back to you, Henry.
Yeah. Thank you, Danny, for your opening, statement. It's interesting. I think that those 3 years of pandemic does really isolated and actually accelerate the normal dialogues and also made big obstacles for communication. So the moment I see the revival of that, for example, the head of a state diplomacy when President Xi met President Biden, I mean, face to face, smiling and shake hands, that sent an enormous picture, and then that actually produced some positive outcome. We see China and US agreed that there should be no nuclear weapons used whatsoever at any occasions. I mean, President Xi said can't really use nuclear weapons and cannot really fight a nuclear war. So that's a huge message. I'm glad to also see President Biden mentioned right after the summit of the post-president saying he doesn't see an imminent attack from China. So that's the outcome of face-to-face talk. So I would really hope that we have more face-to-face talk like that. After these 3 years, would be probably a lift to our bilateral relations as well. And hopefully we saw also in Taiwan, the the KMTs swept the victory of all the most of the mayors' position, because they are actually recognized 92 consensus, and hopefully we could have more integration like used to be, and maybe calm down the tension in the street. So thank you for your suggestions as well. So we hope that we could have more dialogues and understanding. But now I would like to really have an expert on those issues. Dr. Xu Bu, he's the president of the China Institute for International Studies. But I know Dr. Xu Bu, he has a doctor of law, and he's currently the Secretary General of the Xi Jinping Diplomatic Thought Research Center and president of the China Institute for International Studies, and member of the researcher of the United Nations High-Level Advisory Committee members. He actually served as a Deputy Director General of the Policy Planning Department at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and he was a Minister Counsel of Chinese Embassy in Canada, and he was ambassador, extraordinary and plenipotentiary of China to ASEAN, to many regions in the world, and he published numerous papers and articles, and he is writing books on those issues. So President Xi is really a very knowledgeable person. So I would like to give the floor to President Xi for your opening statement. President Xi, Ambassador Xi, please. Yes.
Thank you, Huiyo. Thank you so much, for the invitation. And I'm so glad to meet, Daniel, online, and some other friends. It's really a long time, when I was dealing with North Korea nuclear issue, actually, we had a lot of chances, to have dialogues and consultation with, Danny. So it's such a, great thing, to meet you online. And actually, I'm also planning to go to States, so I do hope, I will be able to have a chance, to meet all of you, face to face. And the meeting between President Xi and President Biden was really a great meeting, I would say, after so many years, and especially as two old friends. President Xi and President Biden, had a lot of chances of meeting with each other, and they had, long talks, during their career. So obviously, we all, noticed the pictures when they met in Bali Island, in a way which appears to be very friendly, very comfortable, and also, very, I would say, energetic in a way to promoting the not only person-to-person atmosphere, but also, to the bilateral relationship. So that's why I do believe, the Bali Island has served several purposes. One is to put up a floor, which has been a very important comment from U.S. media, comment. I would say, yes, it's true. I would also agree with the point that the meeting in Bali Island has actually, put up a floor, which aims to stop the further deterioration of the bilateral relationship. And second, it also has brought some expectation to the relationship. And actually, yesterday, I read an article from Foreign Affairs. It talks about, pessimist leaders will usually take risky foreign policy measures so as to to make the bilateral relationship even more dangerous. So I mean, after so long time of pessimistic comment from both sides, the meeting of the two leaders has brought some kind of, optimistic expectations for the two sides. And that, I believe, would also serve the two sides to try to find a way to deal with properly the issues or the disputes between the two countries. And thirdly, the meeting has also provided some kind of predictability of the relationship. As Danny has rightly pointed out, we have witnessed the deterioration of the relationship for the last quite a few years, and the two sides are blaming each other for unpredictability for all those measures taken by each side. So practicability is really an issue of the policy orientation, which might be able to have some kind of impact on policymakers. So I would say the meeting has provided somehow a kind of practicability which may well serve the purpose for the two sides to hope, we can try to agree with each other on some of the very important issues that might impact the bilateral relationship. And I would also say the Bali Island meeting has also injected a kind of vitality for the bilateral relationship. Having said all that, I would also think the relationship, of course, is still confronting a lot of challenges and difficulties. So we have to think very hard, especially on the issue of misperception or misjudgment of the intention of each side. From Chinese point of view, we believe there is a lot of misperception or misjudgment of the strategic intention of China. When China grows and when China, becomes even stronger, what China does want to, is China going to take over the United States, or is China trying to driving the US out of Asia? Having been working in the government, especially in the policy planning department for so long, and involved with the North Korea nuclear issue, and also in ASEAN for quite a few years, I know well, when President Xi Jinping say, the Pacific Ocean is wide enough to have both United States and China, we by no means to say, United States should be out of Asia. Actually, the United States is the single most important economic and trading partner for China. So, of course, we also see the ASEAN countries, they don't want to take side. So that obviously shows, there is no way to try to drive America out of Asia Pacific. And, there's also no way for the United States try to, make the ASEAN countries to take sides. I mean, as Danny has rightly pointed out, actually, we have no other alternative, either on the issue of food security or climate change or economic, growth. We have no other choice but to cooperate. So I do believe, the Bali Island will be a very important signal for a fairly process, which will be able to let us find out some of the opportunities to deal with the bilateral relationship in a more appropriate way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador Xu, for your very also very constructive opening remark. We're really putting a big hope of those more government level visits. Of course, in addition to Secretary Blinken, we hope that USTR, Secretary of Commerce, Secretary of Treasury, we hope that we have more visitors, even senators or congressmen. That's another area that very few of them ever coming up. But now I think with this opening up of pandemic, welcoming more visitors, and also vice versa, we felt there's a big need to Chinese diplomats and of course business and think tank people go to visit U.S. as well. So we hope that the elevating of this high level and all levels of visit and exchange will certainly help. I mean, we thank you for your comment. Now I'd like to have another friend that to come in and to share his view now, and Dr. Colin Bedford. I mean, Dr. Colin Bedford is a non-resident senior fellow at Brookings. He's really, specialized in global economy and development programs, but he's also very well knowledgeable and also quite instrumental in many of the global governance issues and agendas, such as G20 summits. He has actually helped as a leading catalyst for bringing experts in consultation with officials, with host government. He was, helping quite a few G20 events in the past. For example, the one he also advised at Brisbane, Japan, G20, for the London, Toronto, Seoul, Cairns, and many, St. Petersburg, so many, including China in 2016. I know recently you've been really instrumental in launching this China West dialogue, and also have 12 experts actually gently second and signed on your recommendation. That's really very unusual with think tank from US, from Europe, from China to jointly consult something for the G20 summit in Bali, which I think is very significant. So we'd like to hear more. What do you think about a multilateral perspective, and where can we work together? Think tanks in US, EU, China, and the rest of the world, for a better future, and of course, better Sino-US relations. So, Colin, you have the floor, please.
Well, thank you very much, Henry. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate your organizing this in the way that you have. And it's a special pleasure to be on the same panel with Dean Shui Lan, who I haven't seen in some time. So I do wish to say something about the China-West dialogue. You won't be surprised, and address particularly the issues you've raised about the degree to which the Bali G20 summit is a turning point, the degree to which it can be a transition to a different level of dialogue and understanding between the US and China. And the thing I think that has to be said is that, as others, as Daniel and Dean Professor Zhu have said, is that there have been several successes from the Bali G20, not least has been the Xi Jinping Joe Biden dialogue in a talk in which they renewed their commitment to dialogue. And I think that is something that's absolutely vital, not only that they continue to have regular conversations between the two of them, but governments as well have opened a new dialogue. And Secretary Blinken's trip is obviously going to open the door on that. How many of the 8 original groups of dialogues will be open is unclear. I agree with what Daniel Russell said, that the dialogue between militaries is clearly a very crucial one. It is also true that I think the Bali summit was a success in a very important way in terms of the G20 summits themselves. I mean, I think what was proven there was that the G20 as a process is a success in not only in global governance and global leadership, but also in providing a place and a process in which geopolitical adjustments also take place, like the conversations between President Xi Jinping and President Biden. The other thing that happened was, as you pointed out, was that there were, and if you look at paragraph, first of all, there was a G20 communique. They called it a G20 leaders statement. The fact of the matter is that there hadn't been any communiques at all between in the Indonesian G20 year, but from ministerial meetings. And the reason for that, of course, was largely the Russian war with Ukraine and the inability to sort of agree on whether to include Russia or not. But the Indonesian President Widodo and their team managed to bring the geopolitical issues to bear in the G20 summit in Bali. And not only that, but to actually not only get a communique and an extensive one on the content, but also on the principles that that govern the international system. It's my observation that you can't have a community if you don't have rules or principles or norms that are universally agreed to and abided by. And I think that paragraph 4, as you look at it, to uphold international law and the multilateral system, to defend all the purposes and principles in the Charter of the UN, a mention to adhere to international humanitarian law, which includes an explicit mention of protecting civilians and infrastructures, and actually international humanitarian law also protects combatants. And as you pointed out, the use of and the threat of nuclear weapons is said to be inadmissible in that document. So this, I think, was a major point of convergence on foundational principles that can keep what is actually at stake, I think, is whether or not we can continue to have a single international community, or we somehow diverge in the yellow woods and go to a bifurcated world in which there are blocks rather than a single community. And so I think those statements that I've just identified really were a step in the right direction, especially in light of the fact that China and the US are converged on these, but with important support from Indian Prime Minister Modi. I mean, it was quite visible, quite obvious that he had a huge hand in bringing this about. So the thing I would like to say is that I think this success, we cannot take this as a turning point that depends on the momentum coming out of Bali, but rather have to see it as a fragile, as a moment in time in which it's up to the governments, of course, and officials, but also those of us in the communities of engagement communities that surround the G20 summit, the business community, the scientists, the think tanks, and so on, to support this transition to a more continuous element, a process of dialogue, both within and around the G20, but also independently of it. So I think we have to have a sense of urgency in the think tank community about the time urgency of this, that if this moment is to be capitalized and realized into a trend, we shouldn't just leave it to governments to have to make that happen for themselves, but we have to somehow demonstrate that dialogue leads to results. And I'll have to say, that with the experience we've had over the last 2.5 years with the China-West dialogue, where we've had more than a dozen Zoom sessions involving 20 people or more, and we've appeared also in 3 annual Global Solutions Summits in Berlin, where the fundamental principle of this China-West dialogue is that it's a dialogue that is with China, not about China. So there've never been any of these more than 24 meetings without China participation. In Zhuilan and you yourself have participated in these, as have others. And that's been vital. And I think the other principles, I'll be quite brief here, I'll try to be concise, is the driving principles of the China-West dialogue have been viewing diversity as an asset, because diversity creates creativity. There are different perspectives. There's a lot of management literature, business literature in the United States about the fact that you want diversity in your senior management team, or you're going to end up with groupthink and not creative ways of operating. So the very diversity that's embedded in the G20 is actually an asset. The very diversity that we've included in our group with over 50 people from over a dozen countries participating is an asset, because pluralism breaks binary conceptual thinking and binary politics, geopolitics. And I think the fundamental, my starting point when I founded the China-West Dialogue was the fact that leaving the US-China relationship to itself alone was a disaster, because binary relationships conceptually tend to create dogmatic debates rather than convergence, and that it ends up in feeding conflict rather than convergence. So the other principle is complexity, is that complexity is your friend because it creates policy space. If you disaggregate the issues that the G20 deals with, and you deal with them in a sectoral basis, as is what happens in the G20, is you inevitably delve into the complexity of the issues. That creates tremendous opportunity, a tremendous amount of policy space for countries to align themselves differently, not dogmatically on issues. So a key element that I think has been true of the way the G20 has operated is that you have shifting coalitions of consensus, that countries don't tend to group up on every single issue. They rather shift because of their interests are different in different sectors. So delinking issues is a very important thing, as Daniel Russell pointed out. So the other thing I think that is absolutely essential to do, which is to realize that the confrontational narratives between the US and China have actually dominated the capacity of global governance and global cooperation to move forward. And that delinking the foreign policy discussions from domestic politics in the narratives on both sides is an important thing to do. So I think that that we need to think hard ourselves in the knowledge community and the think tank communities, not only about how we conduct our dialogues, how pluralistic they are, how much professionalism can be brought to bear on complex issues within our think tank communities, but also by including officials and including concern about how it is that the dialogues within the think tank community, within the knowledge community, spill over into and serve as an example for and try to motivate different dynamics in the official circles that are based on the kind of principles that the China-West Dialogue has proven actually work. So I appreciate the chance to be involved in this conversation. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, thank you, Colin, and for your also very constructive input as well. I agree with you that I think G20 this year has really beat expectations of many countries and many think tanks probably. And with the crisis going on, we still managed to have this G20 very fruitful. I think it's largely also attributed to really this people-to-people exchange, face-to-face meetings, and of course also. Indonesia has played a very significant role in bringing everybody together, and I think has started this momentum of engage more active diplomacy, particularly for China. Since G20, President Xi already met 40 bilateral meetings in APEC, in Arab, in Central Asia, many events. So this is a good sign. But I also agree with you that. We probably needs to do more on the domestic issues. Maybe concentrate a bit more on that. When I was talking to Richard Haas, I mean he recently wrote a book. I mean, he also emphasized how we can address domestic challenges issues, and then so that maybe we can really trying to correct that ourselves with each other rather than really view each other as as a threat. So that is really very helpful. I think that the G20, for example, I think China-US dialogue has also played a lot of role, like you mentioned. A lot of discussion is really useful. And for example, I remember President Xi told President Biden at the Bali G20, he was saying like, look, freedom, human right, and democracy also values of Chinese Communist Party, and then they are also promoting that. So let's talk about all those issues. What's really the standards of human right? That I know that that China-West dialogue was talking. So those are really useful. Democracy. Last year when we have the think tank summit like this one, we talk about what's the effectiveness of democracy at different places. Maybe at different form and shapes, but they all have some element of that, and we should. How can we converge and accept differences? Those are good discussions. Now, again, I would like to turn to our next speaker, Dr. Lan Shi. I mean, Dr. Shi is the Hong Kong Chair, Distinguished Professor, and Dean of Schwarzman College in Tsinghua University. But Dr. Shi Lan is a veteran think tank. He was also Dean of the School of Public Policy and Management at Tsinghua University from 2008 to 2018. If I remember correctly, he almost was a founder of the Tsinghua Public Policy Management School. So he has a very distinguished academic career. He has a PhD from Engineering Public Policy from Carnegie Mellon University and taught at the George Washington University before returning back to China 2 decades or 3 decades ago. So Lan, it's your turn. You have many thoughts. I'd like to hear from you.
Okay. Well, I think thanks very much for inviting me to this really very distinguished panel. It really, I think it's wonderful to see so many old friends online, and not the least Colin. I think that we haven't seen each other for quite some time. I also want to take this opportunity to wish our all friends, in particular our American friends, a wonderful holiday season. I think the Christmas is just coming around the corner. I think the Chinese New Year is following the calendar New Year. So anyway, this is really a holiday season. So it's great to have this forum at this time. So now let me turn to my sort of comment on in Chinese, and so hopefully that our interpreter may have a sort of a kind of a change. 首先的话，我觉得非常感谢啊，就是前面。
First of all, I'd like to thank the previous panelists and the guests. Yes, I fully agree with your thoughts. Yes, the G20 summit in Bali is very critical, but still we have to take a step back and take some reflections. The expectations, how can we translate into reality, between which there is a lot of uncertainties, because I'm not researching on international politics, so I'm only looking at the public policies perspective. In the past several years, we have encountered a lot of opportunities, or numerous opportunities, and we used to have very high expectations, but finally turned out to be disappointed very heavily. And that is true. So here, what I'm thinking of is how to seize the current opportunity when it is upcoming.
I think this is very important. My observation is that there are still 3 issues that we need to pay attention to. First, the most critical, and actually is also a lot of people have already paid a lot of attention to it, managing risks. So everyone hopes to, no one wants to see the worst scenario. We want to avoid the worst scenario. I think we are doing quite well, including the Taiwan issue. So for these, I think the leaders of both countries have very good understanding of the reality and have taken effective measures. But what I'm going to mention next, the other 2 points have not been fully realized, so I want to spend more time on these other 2 points. The second thing we need to manage is to manage contradiction.
Yeah.
We need to manage disagreement, manage differences. So over the past few years, the governments of the 2 countries and there are many policies that have been passed by both governments. But if you do a serious analysis of these, there have been lots of contradictions in these documents or policies. If we do not address this, that means, to be honest, to be frank, we won't see very good results of more face-to-face meetings, because we feel that what you do is contradictory. I don't know whether if you are telling the truth today or not, because I do studies on science, technology policies. So if I'm to read, the talks or policies by the U.S. government, let's say U.S. and China are competitors, and their rivalry are even more serious than competitors. But if you look at the policies in the science and technology sector of the U.S., they treat China as enemy, not just competitor. So the U.S. is imposing a stricter control or constraint on the technology. So the 40-year of reform and opening up, China's efforts to integrate to the world economy and industrial chain, it is intended to get China out of all this at the cost of heavy price to the U.S. industries. So as any rational person, we feel being treated like an enemy. Because, well, if we develop any policies, at least we need to do some cost-effective analysis. Now the result is we lose more and US lose less. Even such policy can be accepted or implemented. So a lot of contradiction between the walk and talk. So it's very difficult for us to understand your real intention. Maybe sometimes you have real good intention. It cannot be fully realized or understood by the other party. So manage the contradiction should also be put on the agenda, which should be addressed. The third point is managing fraction. Managing fraction. Fracture. Because I do studies in global governance. It's your field of interest, colleague. But we are now seeing a damage to the global governance order established after World War II. Maybe when there is a trigger, it will be collapsed. We know that in the past few years, a lot of economic, social arrangements which we took for granted have been weakened in recent years, including WTO, things like WTO or SWIFT. Nobody paid any attention to SWIFT until Korean War, and then it was used as a weapon. So we know in the current global system, as a country, as an ordinary citizen, what can I really rely on? So everything can be taken away overnight. So in that sense, we are caught up in this dilemma, self-fulfilling prophecy. Because if I'm concerned that something may happen, then I need to take actions to set up my own independent system. But the more you do that, then the sort of decoupling, the fracture will even be worsened. And ultimately, it will be the reality. So like WTO, many other arrangements, if we look at them one by one, they are faced with many challenges. So managing contradiction, managing fractures, these two topics should be put on top of the agenda or policy agenda. So that's my observation as someone who studies public policies. So I hope that both parties can give these points more considerations. Dr. Wang mentioned, asked some very interesting questions. And the fourth question, what my recommendations for the future? I fully agree with other panels, like dialogue and exchange at multiple levels. I agree, they're very important and helpful. And we need to train our young people, young talent. A Schwartzman college is an institution like that. Every year we recruit 150 students, about 80% are from other parts of China. They study in China, live with Chinese students. They have very deep engagement with the Chinese society. We have no efforts to impose anything on them. And our teachers are from global hire. 50 to 60% of our faculty are from global hire. So we hope that these young people, the consensus reached among these young people, and can contribute to solving the global issues. So we also need to take a long-term view. And secondly, I agree with CWT. It's not just about China and the US. We also need to involve other stakeholders, including countries and organizations, to discuss and solve the issues. I also want to mention that even at the official level, not only at the administrative level, executive level, we pay a lot of attention to the executive branch of the US government, but we also know parliamentary level is also very important. The House and the Senate, the House representatives and senators have a much longer term impact on policies than executive branch members. So for that is also a very big weakness in our current exchange. So we need to have a stable exchange arrangements at the parliamentary level. Like a lot of these acts are passed. And we also need to identify safe areas, safe zones. I think it is particularly important for science and technology. I agree with Mr. Russell. I want to give a simple example regarding climate change. Climate change is indeed a common interest of China and US. And now we see that the so-called climate overshoot, we're probably going to overshoot 1.5 degree increase. So everybody needs to get ready for that, and we need to shorten this time overshooting 1.5. Now there's the carbon capture technology. It is a very technology of huge potential. A few days ago, I met with a former senior executive from Tesla. is working in this area, and the U.S. has some technology, 1 million ton CO2 pilot device in Texas. He said that if China and US can work on this, if we can build a large carbon capture project in China, it will serve humankind, the whole world. But we need China and US are both willing to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Xuelan. 谢谢. So I think you're absolutely right. We need to manage the risk and manage the friction, and absolutely, and of course also we need to engage more with congressmen, senators. I was even suggesting we should invite them, come to see the real China. And again, I think that we are facing such a very serious situation. For example, now there's over 1,000 Chinese companies on the entity or watch list on the US side, and none of almost none of them from Chinese side. So that's a serious, national security. But if the economic is really getting businesses greatly damaged, that's also a security issue for the livelihood of the people in both countries. So we have to probably have some new thinking. Thank you for that. Now, I think we are running time is short, but I'd like to hear Yin and Yunquan. So maybe 5 minutes, and then we'll leave a bit time to wrap up from our whole panelists. So Yin is really he's Steve Schwarzman Senior Fellow for China Studies at the Council of Foreign Relations, a very prestigious think tank. But Yin has also an expert on Chinese politics, society, and religion, and he's the author of quite a few books. And then he has been really also very well in the media field, in the think tank community, and of course. You have done a lot of work in the past, and now, particularly now, you're heading the China studies at the Council for Foreign Relations. We'd like to really hear from you. So Yin, let's hear from you, please.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Henry, for organizing this panel. I've been learning a lot already, just listening to everyone talk, and just following Professor Xue. I wanted to echo his support for the sort of people-to-people contacts that Tsinghua has been doing. I've spoken at his center before and advised some of his students. I think those kind of things in the long term are of great help for the two countries. I think in the shorter immediate term, if we're thinking again to Bali and whether the meeting there will be a turning point or not, I would say, and just to sort of keep it brief, I think it really depends on domestic politics in both countries. And I think if we look at both countries, there's been some changes over the past few months, especially the midterms in the United States, which puts the House under Republican control, and it's still a bit of a victory for Biden that the Senate is not under Republican control, but the House being under Republican control probably opens up a lot of unpredictable factors or things that will be hard for the administration to control. Which will make it hard in a way to maybe guide the relationship the way the administration might want to guide it. It wouldn't surprise me. Some of the people in the House have called for investigations into the origins of COVID and things like that. Now it's hard to know if this was just election campaign rhetoric or whether they'll actually do things like that. But I can imagine sort of initiatives and coming from a Republican-led House that would be difficult for improving or for keeping the relation on some sort of an improving path. And I know that I think, from the administration's point of view, they often will say, well, we can't control the House. And for example, we couldn't control Pelosi going to Taiwan or not. I think that's of course true, that Biden can't directly tell Pelosi what to do. I think maybe, though to some degree, I think other countries have a hard time, and not just China, but I think other countries have a hard time sort of understanding the somewhat schizophrenic US political system, where you have the administration doing one thing, other parts of government doing other things. I think one thing that would help would be if the administration took clearer positions on these. And so in the case of Pelosi's visit, for example, not really signaling whether they were for or against it, that might have helped indicate where the administration stood on some of this. And this will also be a challenge going forward with the Republican-led House. On the Chinese side, we've seen, of course, after the 20th Party Congress, Xi Jinping in a stronger position perhaps than before, taking a third term as General Secretary. And recently, with the relaxation of the COVID policy, there's perhaps some other steps on the domestic front that would also help the bilateral ties. I mean, obviously, relaxing the COVID restrictions helps on a technical point of view. Getting into China becomes a lot easier. That goes without saying. But if this is also accompanied by, let's say, more economic reforms that some people might consider necessary, freeing up the private sector, some change in how foreign companies are viewed, this can also help the bilateral relationship, because I think we can't forget the economic side. And the US business community and also in Europe, the European business community has been largely silent in opposing some of the anti-China moves, and that's partly because the business environment hasn't been so great. So if there are some reforms or measures taken on the Chinese side, that could also help bolster China-U.S. relations, even if it's not directly in diplomatic efforts and that sort of thing. So I think those sort of political moves are vital. And I think maybe one of the problems is that perhaps neither side wants to take action for fear of looking like they're moving first, or that they're maybe looking weak or something like that. And so it almost would take a leap of faith for one side or to sort of take the initiative and to prevent this sort of action-reaction spiral from continuing the way it's been going for the past 4 or 5 years. So I know we're on time limits, so I'll just stop it right there and can move on to others.
Great. Okay, thank you very much, Ian, for your very concise comment and recommendations. But last but not least, 我想介绍一下这个于院长哈，于院长是这个
Mr. Yu.
博士，这个是当代中国与世界
Okay, President of Academy of Contemporary China and the World, ACCW, which is also one of the influential think tank in China and the world as well. And Mr. Xu Yun is the PhD of history and the founder and the president of ACCW. And he is very influential in terms of the expertise. And also this academy has more than 100 researchers and fellow researchers. So with the support of ACCW, we feel very honored. And President Yu, this is your floor right now. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wang. Yes, like you, I'm not here to organize anything or express anything. I'm here to learn and listen to new ideas. So I'd like to express my gratitude to all of you. Yes, I fully endorse the ideas. And also I want to provide some thinking points for reference as well, because this discussion is pretty much like interactive, and each one of the guests, especially the previous guests, they have expressed a lot of good ideas on the whole. Because my academy is the researcher and a practitioner of the research findings. So I feel very passionate about these ideas. The US is a very critical country to China, to the world. So whatever research we're doing, we cannot avoid the U.S.-China relations, and this is the area that we have to cope with. In 2021, I remember by that time, and there is a delegation of the CICG, the leader of the CICG, took the mission to US, and Carnegie Foundation is also a recipient of our delegation. And we're talking about whether China is a rival or not to the United States and vice versa. And after 4 years, yes, we come here together also discussing the same issue. So the promotion, communication, or international communication and international affairs, I think at this critical point of time in this environment, this is a rather strategic issue, and whether China can pose strategic threats to US. I remember there is a statement by some experts previously that there is a huge disparity between China and US in terms of the political systems, in terms of the way of thinking, and they think that China is a great threat to the world, to China and to the capitalist world. So I think right now China, our status quo, our positions, and also the world's values or the world visions about China has fundamentally changed as well. And there's a lot of figures about the people-to-people understanding actually the negative views from these Western countries about China. It's pretty much critical. And so about 2/3 of the people from Western countries think negatively about China, and that's something we have to concern and care about. So the suggestions and ideas and insights from the previous speakers are very critical. And some people also think that the Bali summit, G20 summit would be the turning point of these two countries' relations. But I don't think that is necessarily so, but there are some positive signals posted from this summit. And there is a lot of suggestions from the previous speakers. For example, this innovation forum hosted by CCG, probably we can think that it can become the regular forum, and a lot of preferential events can also be convened around this forum, so that kind of effect of the lubricant can be exerted. In the past 40 years, we have accumulated a lot of good experiences, but this 4 decades of good experiences suddenly disappear within only 3 years or 4 years of time. So we have to draw upon lessons from this. And talking about the education of the young people, yes, right now we are initiating the international youngsters, or the GYLD, and so that the talents of the youngsters and also the promises brought by the youngsters can be amplified and can be practiced, and also the wisdoms from them can also be practiced and to influence them very positively about the world situation right now. And also a lot of cares also from the universities like the Schwarzman College of Tsinghua University and many other universities. So I think right now, we think that we really need some very constructive suggestions. For example, is there any realistic practices that can be practiced in the near future between China and the US? So this is my thoughts. Thank you. Thank you, President Yu. You mentioned 2 points. One is that the US-China think tanks are how to enhance our research in the future. I think this forum has actually responded very positively from them. And Xue Lan, the dean of the Schwarzman College of Tsinghua University, which is also one of the influential think tank in China, and also President Yu, you are also the
we have panelist waiting on the next panel, which is also very good. Many university presidents and distinguished panel will be coming. But before we close, we have 5 minutes left. I would like to have 30 seconds of each of you to give some recommendation for this coming Secretary Blinken's visit. Basically, President Xi and President Biden said we are now leaving to our senior diplomats to really find the concrete proposals for the Sino-US relations. So So I'll make two brief proposals. One is that maybe at this upcoming visit, we could have, revive the tourism to the US. Before the pandemic, we have 3 or 4 million Chinese tourists go to the United States. We have, many US, tourists coming to China, and also we hope to have more US students coming to China. So that's number one proposal. I would like to put them on discussion list, revive the tourism of both countries. Number one. Number two recommendation I can give is that I know that the US has set up many alliance and framework, but one framework is really on the economic. It is Indo-Pacific economic framework. It's an economic framework. 7 ASEAN countries are in it. It's in the Asian region and Indo-Pacific Asian region. So why not, have China be part of this framework? Let's talk about the economy. It's hard to imagine, the framework in this region without the largest economy in this region, or one of the largest to participate. So maybe we could be part of the economic framework, and also hope the US will come back to CPTPP, that we can have more channels to talk. That would be my 2 or 3 recommendations. So I will start with Daniel and each of you for 30 seconds for your recommendation for upcoming senior diplomatic meeting in January or February. Danny, please.
Henry, I endorse your suggestions. Tourism brings revenue, money in both directions, and student exchange brings long-lasting understanding. It's hugely important to realize that another society is not the enemy. So I endorse that. I also think that the United States rejoining TPP and then China joining as well would be very constructive. As far as the Indo-Pacific economic framework, that's still very much in the design stage, and it's about standards. And as I used to say about China joining TPP, the world will be a better place if China can meet those high standards. I already made 2 recommendations in my beginning remarks, so I'll stop here.
Okay, thank you. Ambassador Xu, please.
Thank you, Huiyo. My suggestion to Secretary Blinken would be provide more practicability for the relationship. And second one would be to make sure to send out a signal of China and the US are stakeholders instead of rivalry or even enemy. And of course, I would also echo what Huiyo has just mentioned, not try to expel China out of the regional economic framework of cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Xu. And Dr. Bradford, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's customary for foreign ministries. The State Department is our foreign ministry, obviously. There's often friction. I was in the Treasury Department in the Carter years. There's often frictions with the ministries of finance. And the G20, for better or worse, now, even though that it's broadened its agenda quite a bit, is seen as a finance economics thing. So I think a message to Secretary Blinken might be to see the G20 as an eclectic forum now that deals with systemic global issues and threats and risks, not just economics, and to be sure that ambassadors and representatives of the State Department are literate and involved and supportive of work on the G20. The second message I think I would give is that is a self-interested one for all of us, I think, is to impress upon him the fact that the G20 has something like almost a dozen engagement groups, one of which is the think tank engagement group, and that think tanks are important. And then the third recommendation I would make is to us, is the one I made in my talk, which was we need to make sure we're not just talking to ourselves, but that we're talking in forums where civil society, the business community, scientists, youth, women, all the engagement groups that are represented around the G20 are also engaged with us. The Global Solutions Summit in Germany every year is such a place where a huge number, 1,600 people the last time we met in person there, is people come from all different professions. And it makes for it is a form of governance. It is a place where ideas get put in play within the G20, because the Global Solution Summit actually reports to the G20, just like the think tank. There are too many policy briefs in the T20 track, not too few. And the issue is, how do we connect as people in the knowledge community to the politics of the geopolitical era we're in? I think we cannot just be experts. We have to be good global citizens too.
Okay,
thank you.
Good, thank you, Colin. And Dean Xuelan, please.
Let me make one amendment to your proposal and one addition, one new proposal. One is the one you talked about, the student exchange and so on. I fully agree. I think that we need to remove the obstacles of really student back and forth. I heard that last year there was a student who was according to the the exchange programs of the two universities, one in China, one in the US, who got support from the State Overseas Foundation, and her visa was rejected because she received state funding for those exchange programs. That's really ridiculous. So I think those kind of ridiculous kind of obstacles that need to be removed. That's probably the first thing. The second thing, I wanted to reemphasize the need to have exchange between parliamentary systems in two countries. And there, I think that there's a need to establish a regular channel of communication among the two parliamentary systems as soon as possible.
Thank you. Excellent proposal. Parliamentary exchanges has to be strengthened as well. Dr. Yu, please. John Yin, maybe I just Yin, for your any final word?
Yeah, sure. I think it would be symbolically important if the two sides could agree, if Biden could push to restore something like the Fulbright academic exchange program and even the Peace Corps, because these were sort of policies that were purposefully put in place to cut person-to-person ties in between China and the United States. And of course, this would require China's approval as well. And so getting that sort of thing in place. And I think this would also help maybe in some way signal that we're not, that China is not sort of this big bad other country, which is the way it's become presented in many, dominantly, I think, in US politics right now. But it's kind of like in some ways a bit more of a normal country where people can go and study and so on and so forth. That might help in terms of the academic exchanges.
Great, thank you. Good recommendations. Dr. Yu, please. 于院长，您再说一个。
好啊，我们希望这个疫情还是这个交流的寒冬能够尽快的过去。
We hope the cold winter of exchange, the COVID, can be over soon, and we hope to work with CCG and my colleagues together to take action to make up for the deficits in the exchange.
Okay, so we really run out of time. Also, I would like to add one more, maybe to increase the journalist exchanges and facilitate more understanding of each other. So we have really a fascinating discussion. I really appreciate all of you, Danny Russell, and Ambassador Xu, Colin Bradford, Ian Johnston, and of course, Ding Xuelan and Ding Yunquan. So it's really fascinating. I think we have made a good recording of this, and we show it again. And we hope that this is a good start of our forum of this year. We look forward to seeing all of you again sometime in the next year. So thank you very much, and Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Thank you.